So I just drove my standard Mark 2 parts truck down the field this afternoon. My God, it's been over a year since I've driven a standard Mark 2, and I tell you what, something different. Below 2 grand, there's nothing. It's weak as anything. There's no fuel going in at all, and then once you get over 2 grand, it just surges up. And I think, how do you put it? On a Mark II, you obviously got the electronic pump, so whilst it's not putting in a lot of fuel, it's quite conservative and a bit, Greta Thunberg sort of, don't put too much fuel in, don't make any smoke. They're quite weak fuel-wise, but I think the timing's quite optimised, so you get a lot of torque, but it's all above 2000. So below 2000, you put your foot down and it's not stumbling, but it's not really going anywhere. And then once you get above 2000, it's sort of a whoosh, and you're away. And it pulled quite well, don't get me wrong. But with my Mark 1 engine or mechanical pump, it'll lug, and it'll lug from like 1400. And obviously you don't want to go smashing it flat to the mat, but it will pull from 1400. And when you're pulling away, you can put your foot down and it feels like you're going somewhere, and the torque's just constant. I don't think there's as much torque as standard, if you were to put the pumps side by side, but there's definitely a broader torque curve, whereas the Mark II is like slowly, then it ramps up and you're away. The Mark 1 mechanical pump sort of like, chug chug chug, lug lug lug, and and there's no real surge of power in there. So when I had my Mark II, and you could never change the pre-fueling, so I'd done a load of work to it and got a RON box, and back then the RON boxes were version 2 I think, and I think he's on like version 3 or 4 now. So you could only change the boost enrichment fuel once it was on boost, and then you could change that. So after 4 psi, mine cut in and put like an extra bit of fuel in, and that was great because it really picked up the truck. But pulling away from junctions was still exactly the same. So the only thing you can do for that is like repop your injectors and do all that kind of basic stuff as such. But the RON boxes now, they've got pre-boost fuel enrichment, so it's almost like turning up the smoke screw on a VE pump, which is quite handy. So I'm actually not a bit gutted because I've got a mechanical pump now, but that was one of the reasons for going for a mechanical pump. And now that the RON box does that, I'm sort of like, oh well. But I think it'd be quite interesting to try a new RON box on a Mark II and see if it takes out that kind of weak spot, because it's not really like it's not really a flat spot. It's not like it's stumbling, it's not going anywhere, it's just weak. It's just so... I think they did it, to be honest, to protect the gearboxes, because they had obviously the trouble with the gearboxes earlier on, and then after 2003 they got a bit better. And I think when they went to fully ECU controlled, because obviously some of the Mark 1s were electronic, some of them were mechanical, I think when they went to fully electronic and Euro 3 compliant, they thought about it and thought, well, we'll turn it down a bit, down low, so it doesn't lug the gearbox so much and destroy itself. Which makes sense, because obviously you've got clutch switches, neutral switches and stuff like that, so it knows when it's in gear and when it's not. The Mark II is quite a simple beast, simple ECU and simple fuel injection really. But it does have a few clever little tricks, like a neutral switch, a clutch switch and things, and don't let it fool you. It does do a lot, but it's not advanced by today's standards. So here's a quick anecdote about Mark II timing. So case pressure on a Mark II, which is the internal fuel pump pressure before it gets to the high pressure element, it builds, I think it's somewhere in the region of about 90 psi-ish, and then it gets more obviously the higher RPM you go, but it's got a ball and spring in the back of the return, so the pump's got constant pressure basically. And then it uses that constant pressure and has a solenoid valve to kind of modulate how far this timing piston swings left and right, which turns the cam plate, which does your timing. So forget about all that for now, but basically that's turning, that's adjusting your timing. So it knows what RPM it's going to, and it can fiddle that round however it wants. If you're going full load and you're really lugging it, it can advance it and get the most out of it, or if you're just cruising, it can retard it a little bit, etc. All of that stuff it'll do. But here's the thing. So that's all electronic and what have you, and the ECU's doing it. On a Mark 1 VE pump, that's a spring, and there's no pressure relief valve in the return banjo. It's just a fixed orifice, like imagine a hole, a blockage of certain size, and the pump's creating pressure, and you spin that pump faster, more RPMs, and it can't push as much through the blockage, so the pressure inside the fuel pump increases, like case pressure. And that then pushes on one side of the timing piston, and on the other side there's a little stack of shims and washers and a spring, and that's your timing advance. So down low at static timing, that's just against a stop, and let's say, I don't know, 16 degrees or whatever it is for an IDI, and then as you rev it, that brings it more and more up to say 30 degrees. And there's also a clever little thing inside the pump over the governor shaft that when the weights fly over it and you pull the throttle lever and it slides back, it covers up a little spill hole in that, and that gives the timing piston an extra bump round. So if your foot flat to the mat, that gives it a bit more. But that's all like it's a curve, you know. You can't selectively change one point because it's just a spring and it's a mechanical thing, whereas the Mark II is obviously, the computer can literally wind it full whack down at 800 RPM, or it can wind it right back. It knows what it's doing, which is good, don't get me wrong, but you do see a lot of timing piston or timing valve failures on Mark IIs now. I think I sold a fuel pump to a guy, my old Mark II fuel pump, to a guy that had a timing valve, 1312 fault code. And the sad thing is, it's a bit like the old Rover 25s, like tractor syndrome, and that's exactly what it basically explain it. The timing valve defaults to the open position, which is fully advanced. So when that goes bad, it just bleeds all the pressure into the timing piston, that winds right round, and you get that real pronounced diesel knock. You know, it sounds like an old tractor, like clackety 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 clack. And the sad thing is, like I say, the valves are like 200 quid nearly. I think they're 190 quid from Bosch, and you obviously need a Bosch or a Zexo one because you're not going to get a pattern part. So that's kind of sent a lot of Mark IIs to the grave, if you know what I mean, or people about to go out and buy a second-hand fuel pump, but then again, that could only be 20,000 miles off of doing it itself. So it's becoming, I've seen a lot more and more of it lately. There's a couple of people that have said to me, have you got a timing valve? And I'm like, no, sorry, you know. And what else can you do, you know? I mean, I've switched over to a mechanical pump now, so I've not got to worry about that. So in that respect, the truck's going to live on for a lot longer. But I think it's just the age of the pump. You think that valve cycling on and off quite a lot, because it's not like an on or off thing. It's if you have it fully on, fully advanced, fully off, it's retarded. So it's pulsing to keep it sort of in a position. And that's well, some of these trucks are coming up to 20 years old. Some of them are done nearly 300,000 miles. You know, that ain't bad going, really. That's done a lot of work. So yeah, is it expected? Yeah, I suppose so, but is it a bit of a shame? Yes. But I did speak to I went to Combat and Diesels a while back and spoke to Stu, I believe his name is, and we were just having a bit of a crack, and I went over there to pick up a set of injectors, and I said, oh, you know, I've put a mechanical pump in mine, and he says, oh, you know, good on you, they don't give you too much trouble usually. And I said, oh no, I've been active on the forum, whatever, and I've helped a couple of people out because they've got timing valve issues. And he said, oh, I think yourself lucky, the Mitsubishis, the housing wears out, so the fuel pump housing that's actually machined out for the timing piston to slide up and down in, which is obviously a good fit. He says, yeah, they wear out, they oval, and then what do? It was a bin job, because you've got to get a new fuel pump case, and I dread to think how much that is, so bin the fuel pump, get a second-hand one, and then that does it again in 50,000 miles, so sounds a bit iffy if you ask me. I think, you know, can't go wrong with the old stuff really. Think about the tractor down the field, that's 52 years old, I think it is this year. Starts up, you know, yeah, it's noisy, not very powerful, but by God does it do it. So keep the old trucks running, keep it simple. Don't go for one of these new common rail things, you know. I can't see anyone going to a common rail in 10 years time after it's been parked up and it's starting. Or think about all those modules, especially modern cars with CAN bus. You're going to go to one in like 5 or 6 years time and it'll be like one of the modules is gone, that knocked out all the rest of it. It's all when they went away from analog electronics, it just made stuff so much more just finicky. Everything about it. Can you put a blah blah bulb? Oh no, it brings up a symbol. You've got to put a ballast resistor on it so it thinks there's a bulb in there. All this CAN bus shit is just ridiculous. Check your screen wash. Well, God, anyone can pop the bonnet and check their screen wash, can't they? What kind of moron do you have to be not to do that? When cars stopped being cars and started being washing machines, that's when it all went wrong. And even like my brother-in-law's got a Mondeo that he got from the dealership just as a runaround, and I looked under the bonnet and it's like, it's only an O2 plate, right, but you look under the bonnet and it's like, fuck working on that, no way. At least with these old Rangers, you know, it's long ways engine layout, you can get to the cam belt fine, you can do gearboxes easy, plenty of space to work. Yeah, okay, Mazda put some bolts in some funny places, but don't they all, you know? I mean, you try and take a turbo off of a front wheel drive car or something without a ramp, mate. It's not a fun game to be playing. I mean, these old trucks, they're worth their weight in gold for modifying and stuff, because it's all driveway job and it's all... for instance, I put a set of train horns on my BMW. Cringe, I know, but I did it. I was young. And ended up having to remove the spare wheel and put it in the boot and put the train horns underneath, because there's like no other space to put anything. Well, under the Ranger you got the bed, you got a bit under the chassis, a bit under the floor pan, plenty of space under the bonnet for God's sake. I mean, all you standard boys, in front of the airbox you can pretty much keep a whole toolbox under the bonnet and still got room to spare. So I think there's something to be said for having a truck with wiggle room, as I call it.